Hi everyone, I'm Julia.
And I'm Melissa.
And this is
Jammin' Macroeconomics Review.
This video will be about inflation, disinflation, and deflation. First, we'll be talking about inflation. Inflation is defined as a sustained increase in general level of prices for goods and services in a country. As the inflation rate increases, every dollar spent buys fewer and fewer goods. In other words, the purchasing power of the dollar decreases. There are several ways to calculate the inflation rate, which is the percentage increase in overall level of prices per year. In order to find the inflation rate, we need to subtract the price level from year 2 by year 1, divided by year 1 prices, all multiplied by 100.
Inflation can be caused by changes in the consumer preferences, changes in the price of inputs, and changes in the prices of the substitute and complementary goods. But causes usually affect us in the short run. The long-term effect of inflation can be explained by the increase in the money supply. For example, let's say all worker salaries tripled. You would think everyone is rich now, but over time the prices will eventually match the increases in income and the real value of money would return to equilibrium. This proportional change in price levels and money supply is called the quantity theory of money, represented by MV equals PQ.
There are 4 key types of inflation that you need to know for the AP Macro exam, so let's get to it. First is demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation results from consumer demand outweighing supply. It is often described as too much money chasing too few goods. There is only so much demand that supply can meet. There are a couple reasons why demand pull inflation occurs. First, it can be due to a growing economy. Families begin to feel confident and secure with their jobs in the economy and spend instead of saving, increasing the aggregate demand. Expectation of future inflation can also lead to demand pull inflation. Once people expect inflation, consumers buy now to avoid future costs. Discretionary fiscal policy can also lead to demand pull inflation. The increase in government spending or cutting of taxes could lead to more disposable income to consumers to spend on goods and services, leading to an increase in aggregate demand. Lastly, technological innovation can also increase aggregate demand. New technology often owns the market unless a newer version comes out. Some examples include Tesla, advanced motors, or battery packs.
Hi guys, welcome to Scripted but Unscripted, where we'll be talking about the examples of inflation throughout the video.
Hey guys, we're going to be talking about an example of demand pull inflation. So one example that I just thought that just popped into my mind is about the Apple iPhone 8s. So the iPhone 8 came out, it was like super cool, Face ID and like all touch, it's always all touch screen. Like everyone was pre-ordering it, people were lining up in line like 2-3 o'clock in the morning trying to get it first, which I don't really understand because you can just wait until they restock, but that's beside the point. So this is a great example of too much money chasing too few goods, because Apple does not have an infinite amount of iPhone 8. So eventually they're just going to run out, and people who are in line that didn't get their iPhone are just going to be angry. But that's a perfect example. That demand is not being met by the supply. So just to recap, high demand of the iPhone 8 because it's new technology, like I said before in the last clip, I hope I did, not being met by the supply.
The second type of inflation is called cost-push inflation. Cost-push inflation is when cost of production rises and overall price level increases in order to maintain profit margins. This type of inflation is from the perspective of the producers and their selling prices. Increases in input can be affected by changes in wages, taxes, natural resources, or imports. Essentially, the decreasing supply due to high production costs while still maintaining the demand leads to an increase in prices. There are various ways cost-push inflation occurs. For example, there can be an unexpected natural disaster that destroys production or worker strikes, forcing companies to raise wages.
Hey guys, so welcome to a segment of scripted but unscripted. The scripted part is what I'm talking about. The unscripted part is my appearance. So, we're going to talk about, I don't know why I just explained that. Oh, whatever. We're going to talk about cost push inflation. So, recently, with all the hurricanes, Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Maria, Hurricane Matthew, a lot of people were trying to escape out of Florida, go north, or wherever they fly out, I don't know. So this increased the demand for gas, and there's only so much oil that can be provided since it's a natural resource. So with the limited supply and the high constant demand that was present, because everyone was trying to fill up, there were like lines like all the way through the road, causing traffic and all kinds of angry people. So this depleted the supply of oil and increased the prices because of that constant high demand. And that's why everyone was in a frantic panic about the prices, but you gotta pay for it anyway because you want to be safe.
The third type of inflation is called hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is described as rapid inflation, typically more than 50% a month. The fourth and final type of inflation is called stagflation. Stagflation is a combination of high unemployment and high inflation rates. To put it simply, it's no growth in the economy coupled with inflation.
Now that we have discussed the different types of inflation, let's move on to the costs of inflation. There are three distinct categories when discussing the costs of inflation. First is unit of account costs. Unit of account is a measure of currency used to represent the real value of an economic item. The cost arises from the way inflation makes money a less reliable unit of measurement, as the inflation rate is known to fluctuate. Then there are shoe leather costs, which describes the increase in transaction costs brought upon by inflation. The name is derived from increased trips to the bank used to extract money so that people can have cash readily on hand to pay for the increased prices, causing wear and tear on your shoes. The last type of cost brought upon by inflation is the menu cost, which is exactly what it sounds like: the cost of changing labels, price lists, and menus, according to the changing inflation rates.
Hey guys, so we touched bases about menu costs in the previous slide. So let's go a little bit in depth on that. So examples would include hiring consultants to develop new software or pricing, retagging the items, disposing of the old taggings, paying catalog designers, and then reluctance of consumers buying the goods because of the high prices caused by inflation, and also printing costs. So I hope you understand it a little better with menu costs. And next time you look at a label, appreciate it. Appreciate the nice font. Appreciate the BOGO in Walmart or Publix. No, it's Publix. Yeah.
Some other downfalls of inflation are highlighted in the relationship between a creditor and a debtor. When inflation is higher than expected, borrowers and lenders are affected differently. In this case, the lender will be losing money because the value of the money has decreased due to high inflation, so the borrower will be saving. It works out this way because, like we said before, as inflation increases, the value of the currency decreases. It makes sense. Someone who borrowed $150 would want that $150 to be worth as little as possible. When talking about borrowing and lending, the nominal and real interest rates are very important. The nominal interest rate is the sum of the real interest rate and the inflation rate. So, if the real interest rate was 5% and the expected inflation rate is 2%, then the nominal will be 7%. The problem comes if the inflation rate bumps up to 3% unexpectedly. This would affect the lender negatively and the borrower positively. When inflation is high, people are less likely to invest in assets and keep their money in their savings account. This is counterproductive, since the value of their money is eroding and could have been used for productive ventures. Lastly, workers with fixed salaries also get the sharper end of the knife. Workers with fixed salaries will be receiving same income no matter the fluctuating inflation rate. So if inflation is high, the purchasing power of the worker will decrease because there's no compensation given for the price increase.
We reviewed a lot of information on inflation, but how do we calculate it, you ask? By using the CPI, PPI, and GDP deflator. The CPI, or Consumer Price Index, represents the changes in the price level of the market basket of consumer goods and services purchased by households or consumers. The CPI is calculated by taking price changes for each item in the predetermined basket of goods and averaging them. The CPI shows the gradual increase of the price level and how inflation plays a vital role in it. The CPI includes finished goods only and is calculated from the consumer perspective. The PPI, aka the Producer Price Index, measures the gradual changes over time in the selling prices received by domestic producers. Simply, the goods and services purchased by producers, aka intermediate goods. The PPI is often regarded as a preliminary warning for changes in the inflation rate, as commodities are very sensitive to changes in demand and their price level. The GDP deflator is the price level of all new domestically produced final goods and services in an economy. The GDP deflator is calculated by using the nominal GDP and the real GDP and shows how GDP changes relative to the price level.
As you can see, there are many different factors that can increase inflation. But how can we decrease the inflation rate? Well, inflation can be combated by selling bonds, tightening monetary policy, or reducing the money supply. Decrease in inflation can also result from a recession or a contraction in the business cycle. This is a phenomenon called disinflation. Disinflation is a reduction in the inflation rate over a short period of time. Now be careful, don't confuse this with deflation.
Good point. Deflation is when the general price level falls so that inflation rate becomes negative. But what causes deflation? Monetary deflation can be caused by a decrease in the supply of money or financial resources redeemable in money. Nowadays, the money supply is most influenced by central banks like the Federal Reserve. There are two principal causes of price deflation. The first is a general increase in demand for cash savings by consumers and businesses. This could be because consumers are uncertain or because their time preferences for consumption have lengthened. The second cause is a general increase in economic productivity, which grows the supply of goods and boosts the purchasing power of incomes. And how can we attempt to keep the price level stable, you may ask? We can do this a few different ways. Central banks aim to avoid severe inflation and deflation. They can integrate a higher supply of money into the society to balance the impact of inflation. In most cases, a depression occurs when the supply of goods exceeds the supply of money. So, just a recap. Deflation and disinflation are different because disinflation is a decrease in the level of inflation, and deflation implies negative inflation. When deflation is prevalent, the purchasing power of wages and currency are higher than they would have been without deflation.